to be not afraid to scare people away. If you ever type the words "click here," just slap yourself on the wrist. It's horrible.
What are your thoughts on using AI in any type of content?
Oh, there's a question. I'm probably going to make some enemies. If you haven't seen The Princess Bride, forget everything else I've said. Just go watch it.
On this week's episode of The Engaging Marketeer, I'm speaking to Will Slater of 43 Clicks North. Will is a copywriter and all-round wordsmith who I first came across at Brighton SEO when Will was delivering a talk on your content for your website, but used The Princess Bride, the film by Rob Reiner, as an analogy of how you create content and how you pitch your content to your clients. I was enamored with the way Will weaved The Princess Bride all the way through this talk, as I am a huge fan of the film myself. So I thought I've got to get Will on this podcast to talk about content for businesses, how you can structure your content, how you can make your content so that it not only engages people, that it actually drives conversions as well. And we will probably almost certainly mention The Princess Bride more than once. So, Will, you are a content creator, a master of words, a master of all things content-y. How did you, I can't even say it, how did you get into doing that?
I mean, it's a very long and involved story, so I'll give you the truncated version.
Oh, fantastic. We've got about 5 hours, so spin it.
Yeah, I could make it last that long, to be honest. I started off doing marketing, sort of doing a bit of everything, mainly working at smaller companies, smaller businesses who are, I was the marketing team. And I fell into that by accident, maybe, I'd like to say maybe 20 years ago.
Oh.
And since I've been doing it, I've tried doing bits of everything. I've done bits of design and graphics and video and strategy and everything, and narrowed it down to the fact that actually I really like writing, and that's the bit that I'm good at. So when the opportunity came up to work at 43 Clicks North, which is where I am now, we're a performance marketing agency. I jumped at the chance. It was quite a big change because prior to that I was working in a sort of strategic role, but it didn't suit me. I could do it, but I wasn't excelling, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. So you wanted to get your hands dirty.
I like doing writing. I think it's really useful to have that experience of doing everything and knowing how everything works, because it all feeds back in. When you writing copy or content, you need to understand how everything's working, and also, the strategy to it, the psychology to it. It all feeds back in.
Yeah. Well, I imagine you need to understand why you're doing it as well, because there's
exactly,
a lot of people like you with a passion for writing, people who are very good at writing, and there's a lot of frustrated authors out there who will never get the breaks that they want. But doing what you do, writing for businesses so that it attracts, engages, and converts people into sales. You mentioned the psychology. There's a lot more to it than just being a creative writer. So how did you adapt to doing that from somebody that just loves to write?
Well, I mean, I am that aspiring author that you mentioned. I've always written. I've written a novel. I'm working on finishing that at the moment. But actually, the two skills are very, very different. As you say, the actual writing bit of being a copywriter is not the most important skill. It's not the biggest bit. So all that kind of experience of marketing in general is where a lot of that knowledge came from. But as soon as I started with the copywriting, I went out and learned. I went out and read all the books, all the podcasts, all the training courses that I could get my hands on. And a lot of them were crap, because a lot of stuff is, but I found a few absolute gems. I found some brilliant people to sort of follow and learn from on places like LinkedIn. And I just learned how to apply all that psychology.
Any particular ones you could mention that are worth following?
A few. I mean, I'm probably going to forget some here, so apologies to anybody. But there's an American guy called Eddie Schleiner. He's absolutely brilliant. He released a book last year. A chap called Martin Sayers has been really. I've done a couple of his courses. He's brilliant. Mel Barfield is a fantastic copywriter, and she's also been a bit of a cheerleader for me in getting myself out there and doing more. There's a French guy called Louis Grenier, who he's more of a general marketer, but a lot of the principles that he puts in, that he talks about in his post and in his book, feed back into my copywriting. I made some notes actually. I should probably look at them. Harry Dry is brilliant. Dave Harland is absolutely hilarious, but also very, very good at what he does. And there's a podcast called The Fix Copywriting, which is a couple of financial copywriters, and I've learned an awful lot from them as well. So that's just kind of a snapshot, but I mean, there's tons really.
Financial copywriting, I imagine, is, well, I know we've done some, is quite an art to itself, because you're talking about a very dry subject, and if you put a lot of specifics in there, what you put in is likely to change from one year to the next, from one budget to the next. And you've also got to be very careful you're not seen as giving advice. Otherwise, you're going to fall foul of legalities for a website.
Yeah.
So is that something you enjoy doing, financial work?
I do a bit of fun. One of our clients is works in the fintech sector, and actually, it is something that I enjoy, and I do quite enjoy. And this is going to sound really weird, but it's something that I've learned how to enjoy, working with what can be thought of as a bit boring,
a little bit
dry, but because actually, it's really hard. You're right. It is really difficult to make boring content and boring copy interesting and engaging. But if you learn how to do that, you can absolutely reap the rewards. It can, because a lot of people just write boring stuff and it's boring and that's it.
Yeah.
If you can sort of take it to that next level and make it, well, I guess the key is to make it engaging and to make it easy to process. If you can do that, then we've seen, because we're at 43, we're a performance agency, so we tend to track and monitor everything, and we've seen really great results from not even necessarily commercial pages, like informational pages have sort of tracked through to fairly big results for clients, just from writing stuff that does well on Google, which is really important, but also is good to read.
So you mentioned that a lot of people, when they write content like that, it's boring, and that's absolutely the case. And if you write boring content, nobody's going to want to read it. It's never going to convert for you. But here's the $1 million question. Maybe you could advise on this. How can business owners who have an industry that is perhaps quite dry, what can they do to make their content interesting and engaging? If we start with finance, for example.
I mean, I think, to be honest, the same principles apply whatever industry in, whether it's finance or you're selling nuts and bolts or anything that's not sexy, which, to be honest, let's be honest, is most business. Like, we can't all be innocent or whoever writing super fun stuff. We're not all selling Ferraris. A lot of business is quite dry because that's the nature of it. So I'm going to do a little plug here. I'm actually doing a workshop at CopyCon I don't actually know when it is yet, in autumn, where I am going to be doing a workshop on how to make boring content interesting. So if this is something, then get yourself signed up. But there's a few key things that you can do. And the first thing that I found that I had to do to make myself write this is get yourself interested in it. And if you're in that business, if it's your role, then hopefully you're kind of halfway there already because you're in that industry. You've got an interest. When you're doing it freelance or at an agency, it can be quite tricky because you're kind of working on the surface of most of the things you do. So I've trained myself to be more curious and get really nerdy, basically, about looking into the details and really like diving right into stuff and picking out the bits that make it interesting. Because if you can't be interested in it when you're writing something, how can you possibly expect somebody else to be interested in it? You just can't, can you? It doesn't make any sense. So that's step one. The next thing I think is think really carefully about the language you use and the structure of how you write the piece, the article, the copy, page copy, or whatever it is you're writing, and make it pleasant to read. One thing I see an awful lot of is that people use absolutely tons of jargon and big words and super complex run-on sentences. And that's the worst thing you can do. There seems to be, I've met people who will say this, a kind of feeling that you have to show how intelligent you are, you need to use all the big words and all the jargon but actually it doesn't work because nobody wants to read it, especially not if you're sat on your break or whatever, reading something on your phone, or you're just scanning through something that's popped up in an email for work. You don't want to read something that you're trying to read a sentence 4 times just to figure out what it actually means. You want it to just scan through it really quickly and it to be a nice, easy read.
Yeah.
So you need to focus on using friendly language that people can process. And it doesn't mean don't use any jargon. If you're working in the finance industry, obviously there's financial jargon that people use, and that's how people speak in that industry. So you see an awful lot of like advice on how to write better, and it'll be like little one-word things like don't use jargon or use small words, and that kind of advice is on the surface of it useful, but actually doesn't give you enough to actually do anything useful with. So yeah, you don't want to use too much jargon, but you use the language that your customers, your readers are using. You speak in a way that they would want to be communicated to. You use the simplest language that you can, and that might mean using quite a lot of big complex words because you're talking about a complex nuts and bolts mechanical engineering thing. If you try and explain it in small words, you're just going to make it 10 times as long. So yeah, language, hugely important. And the third thing that I like to try and do is try and bring in a bit of a narrative, a bit of a story as much as possible. And this kind of dovetails nicely because you also want to make sure that wherever you can do, you make it about the person that you're writing to. So a lot of websites, a lot of businesses will talk about we do this and our product does this, and it's all about them. So you switch it on its head, talk all about what it does for you and how it solves the problems of the person that you're speaking to. I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here, but I always try and write as if I'm speaking to one person.
Yeah.
So if I'm sat almost like in a sales call, or if I'm sat talking here to you, don't talk to a group of people, speak to someone one-to-one. It's a great way to get that engagement. But yeah, I quite like to use, I almost use, sometimes I'll use like traditional narrative structures to make an article more interesting, and I'll use elements from like novels or films or whatever
like
to make it
Princess Bride,
like the Princess Bride,
like the
exactly.
Princess Bride.
Yes,
There we go.
I was just going to get there in a second. But yeah, the Princess Bride is a really good example. It's a fairly standard use of something called the hero's journey, which is excuse me, a story structure which is everywhere. There's a few like classical story structures, but the hero's journey is by far the most common. So it's Harry Potter, Star Wars, like almost any popular media that you can think of follows the same structure. And that doesn't make it boring. It doesn't mean you know exactly what's going to happen next, but it feels kind of familiar. We know how it works, and that works well with our brains. So the way that I like to do that is to make the person that you're talking to, they become the hero of the story. The problem that they're facing, so that whatever it is that your product is going to solve, is the villain or the monster. And then the product itself is what's called the elixir, which is kind of the thing, the sword in the stone, whatever that gives them the power to overcome the monster, to defeat the villain. And the mentor in the hero's journey is you or your company. So you're giving them this information, the power they need to be able to vanquish the monster or the villain.
So you, as the business, become the Obi-Wan Kenobi,
Exactly.
whereas
Yes.
the business you are speaking to becomes the Luke
The
Skywalker.
Skywalker. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's exactly it. Yeah. Um, and obviously, you're not going to write a novel about nuts and bolts, but you frame it in that way. So you might say, your bolts are always going rusty, and talk about how our nickel-plated titanium bolts or whatever. I know nothing about bolts, as you can probably tell by the way I'm reaching here.
Well, you're doing well. You're doing well. It's good.
I'm doing my best. So hopefully
Yeah.
nobody's turned off yet. Yeah, about how these bolts, your bolts, are different, and how they will vanquish this monster of rust. And the nice thing about using a monster rather than just talking about problems, and this is something that you get a lot in marketing in general as well as copyright. We talk about problems, the problem that's solved. It's a standard thing. The problem with using a problem is that generally you're telling your prospect or your customer that they're doing something wrong. So that's immediately you're kind of getting off on the wrong foot. You're starting with a negative, whereas if you turn that into a villain and make it seem, it's a big problem that everyone's facing, which in terms of rusty bolts, it's not just you. It's not your fault you're using the wrong bolts. So instead of saying you're using the wrong bolts, saying, are your bolts always going rusty? It's something that every handyman has always experienced, these rusty bolts, and you sort of just reframe it as something that's a villain.
I love that analogy you use there, because I've seen this in a talk before. It may have been you, actually. It may have been your talk, but I've seen this in a talk before where somebody talked about how most businesses, when they do their copy, whether it's for web copy or social media or newsletters or blogs, whatever, they tend to put themselves as the hero. But they shouldn't be putting themselves as the hero, because that's just making it all about themselves and nobody wants to read that.
Exactly,
it is
yeah.
your target client that's the hero. Is there a way that businesses could identify that? Is there a way they can look at their own copy and see, do you know what? We've done this wrong. Or is it something they're going to need to get somebody in like you who's going to look at it and do that for them?
I mean, the easiest way is to get professional, because that's what we do. We do it in, day out. But obviously, if you're a small business, you can't necessarily afford to spend hundreds, thousands of pounds on an agency or a copywriter. But you probably can learn a few tricks to make it better. So one easy way to do it is just look through your copy and see how often you say we. And if it's full of we do this, we offer that, you're probably talking about yourself too much. And if that's the case, then all you need to do, because you're probably saying the right things, because people do want to know what it is that you actually do and what the product is, and so on. So you just need to reframe it a little bit. So you just rewrite that sentence. So instead of it saying we make the best nuts and bolts in the country, you'd say nuts and bolts to keep you rust free. It can be that simple of a reframe. I kind of wish I hadn't gone with the nuts and bolts analogy now, because I'm definitely reaching, but we'll roll with it.
I'm sure there's nuts and bolts people listening to this going, oh yeah, he's nailed that. Absolutely. Well, he's not nailed it. He's bolted it.
He's not nailed it.
He's bolted it perfectly. So in terms of writing copy then for businesses, there's lots of different kinds of copy you can write. So obviously you've got blogs, you've got newsletters, you've got landing pages, you've got featured articles, you've got social media copy, you've got short form, you've got long form. Is there a particular kind of copy that you prefer, that you specialize in?
I think probably most writers probably do. I tend to prefer longer form copy and content. It's interesting actually, because depending who you ask, copy and content have slightly different definitions. So the people will say, oh, that's not copywriting, that's content. Yeah. So some people will define copy as specifically anything that is designed to drive an action. So a landing page with a call to action to sign up to a newsletter or buy your nuts and bolts or whatever, that would be copy.
We're sticking with the nuts and bolts. So
We're sticking with the nuts. We've come this far.
That.
Well, we're 20 minutes in. We're going to have to stick with it now.
Okay.
And content, on the other hand, is something that's informational. So it might be a page talking about the benefits of different types of nuts and bolts and when you might want to choose different ones. Now, there is a difference and there is a skills difference in writing those two things. However, they're both, I think that I consider them both writing copy as just different disciplines within the same discipline. But yeah, for me, I work mainly in longer form. I'm not big on social media. It stresses me out a little bit, to be honest. But I quite happily work on sort of action-driven copy or informational content. I get a kick out of both. I really enjoy both. It is a different process, but both good.
And with informational content or longer form copy, obviously the purpose of it is to drive an action, whether that be a sale or an inquiry or to download something. What tips can you offer for people who want to get conversions out of their copy and not just engage and entertain people?
I mean, everything I write or everything I write commercially is designed at some point to facilitate that action. But depending where that piece sits in the marketing funnel, which is a term I hate, but I'm going to use it because it's easy shorthand for what we talk about. If it's a real top of the funnel piece, I actually tend to not think about driving actions or trying to avoid getting too much of that in there, because at that point you are just starting that relationship. You're just trying to build some kind of connection with your potential client. And if you go in, same as if you were networking with somebody, if you go straight in with a pitch, people turn off straight away. So at that point in the journey, I would be focusing purely on giving people the best information in the best way possible, because that's going to make them think of me or the company I'm writing for or whatever as an authority and somebody who can be trusted, which is two things that you want to get straight away. If you've got those boxes ticked, they'll come back to you. And then when they are ready to buy and they do come into your sort of lower funnel, mid funnel content that is more action driven, then they're going to be warmed up already. In terms of driving in that lower funnel stuff for when you actually do want to drive the action, kind of the stuff we already talked about is really important. So making it about them, not you, that applies throughout everywhere. And there are a few other things that I think work really well. I really like to use repetition, especially in web copy, because nobody's going to browse your website in the linear fashion that you want them to. Nobody's going to come to your homepage and then go through all the other pages. They're going to come in somewhere over here and then they're going to jump over here because that's what they want, and they're going to be skipping around. So if you've got kind of key messages, repeat them, get them in everywhere. And you can even just almost repeat them word for word sometimes, but make sure that they're, like, if you've got a key, and it varies with what you're selling. If it's nuts and bolts, it might be that, your nuts and bolts are rust proof. If it's financial advice, then it's that you're an expert and you know your stuff and you're qualified. Whatever, you can keep getting that message in throughout everywhere. And I also like, so I'm going to talk about loops now.
Okay.
So a loop is when you ask a question or you make a statement which tells the reader that there's more to learn. So an extreme example is if you imagine, do you remember sort of maybe 10, 15 years ago when BuzzFeed was absolutely massive and you used to get the absolutely ridiculous headlines from BuzzFeed that would ask a question, and they were actually really carefully crafted and constructed in a specific way to make you click through. That's opening a loop. It's something called the curiosity gap. And the trouble with BuzzFeed is when you actually got to the article, it was just full of adverts and the text on there was crap. And that's why it's not such a thing anymore.
Yeah.
But by opening that loop, you make the reader want to know more. You want to want to read on, find out what you've got to say. So when you're writing, you want to keep opening loops and opening loops, because when there's a loop open, someone's a lot less likely to navigate away. So you keep opening the loops and keep loops open, they're more likely to read through and get all the lovely stuff about the benefits and how great your thing is. And you've got more chance of actually convincing them to take the action that you want them to take and to read all the information there that is going to convince them. So always keep your loops open. That's quite a useful one.
Which is similar to old school TV serials.
Exactly.
Like Flash Gordon and the Lone Ranger, they would, at the end of the episode, it would leave it on a cliffhanger, so that you have to watch the next one, otherwise you never knew what would have happened.
Exactly, and comic books and novels do it with chapters. Like a chapter will often end on a cliffhanger to make you want to read the next cliffhanger, and the next chapter, sorry. Being really specific is another good one as well. We are generally, I'm not a psychologist, but we like specifics. So you see a lot of copy that is a bit wishy-washy and vague, and it's very nicely written, but you come to the end of it, you think, you haven't actually told me anything. So the more specific you can be about exactly what it is that your thing, whatever it is, does, how it does it, and how it solves that problem, how it gets rid of that monster, the better people are going to respond. And I don't know why people seem to be so scared of being specific. It's as if to say, well, if I'm too specific, then I'm going to scare people away. And it's true, you might do. If you're super specific, there might be people who will say, well, this thing's not for me, I'll go away. But actually, that's what you want, because those people weren't going to buy it anyway. So if the call to action you've got at the end of your piece of copy is to book a sales call, well, that's brilliant, because you've just saved your salesperson hours of work where they're trying to sell the thing to somebody that actually didn't want it in the first place.
Yeah, that's a really good point. There's too many people waste time because they're afraid to be specific. They're afraid to tell people that this is the actual price, this is what it does, this is what you're going to need to do it, because they don't want to scare them off. They don't want them to go, oh, actually, it's not for me. But in reality, you should be turning people away.
Absolutely. It's really important, because you're wasting time otherwise. You're wasting your time and you're wasting their time. And that's not a good way to make money, which is what it's all about at the end of the day. So yeah, be specific. Also, when it comes to that's a really hard word to say when you say it quickly. Specificity. Yeah, it's awkward, isn't it?
Yeah,
specificity.
I know what you mean.
The more precise you can be with numbers and data, the better. So again, you see loads. Oh, we've served thousands of people. How many thousands? 10,000? 100,000? It's meaningless. Whereas if you can give a specific number, again, people respond better to that. You know, our bolts have been used in 47 ships, whatever. I don't know how many ships there are or bolts.
That's probably how many ships there are in the world. That's probably it.
Yeah, there's not that many, are there? There's not like the sea's big or anything.
No.
So yeah, specificity is a great one, and you really want to be super credible as well. One of the things I really liked, and it kind of goes back to the specificity and the fact that you need to be not afraid to scare people away, is a really good way to build trust is to kind of lead or own your flaws. So nothing does everything. A bolt is not a nail. So if somebody's looking for nails and you tell them it's a bolt, you're going to scare them away. But that's brilliant, because it's not right. And hopefully you might sell nails anyway and we've gone to another page. But whatever it is you're selling, it doesn't do everything. So by leading with what it doesn't do, or by the things that it doesn't do, you're getting rid of those people who don't want it, but you're also building trust and becoming more credible. And I'm trying to think off the top of my head of a good example of how to say this. So you might say, an example I've used before is if you're selling like tax return software, and you could say something like our tax software will solve all your problems, but that's not true. You know it's not true because I've got bunions. It's not going to help with that. But you could go a bit more specific, and you could say it'll solve all your tax problems. But actually, it's still not true because there's all sorts of. It's only going to do a very specific thing. So you could say something like, "Our tax software won't file your tax returns for you, but it will make them a lot easier." And that, like, if I read that, that's a statement that I can straight away believe because there's no hyperbole, there's no nonsense. It's honest and open, and especially if you're talking about web copy, which I think is probably what most copy is nowadays. And even if you're not, let's be honest, everybody's on the internet, everybody's online. So if your product, your thing, that there are things that it doesn't do, or there are downsides to it, people are going to find it anyway. So if you're telling them about it straight away and getting it on your website, it's like, well, brilliant. They're telling us the truth straight away.
That goes back to the old traveling salesman with the snake oil, doesn't it? That it cures everything. It cures warts, it cures herpes, it'll make you more attractive, it gives you your hair back, it does everything. Take a swig of this and it just cures everything that you could possibly have wrong with you. And we know that's a load of crap.
Yeah.
So when people advertise that on their products, we think, yeah, does it really?
Yeah.
It probably doesn't.
And, I think like most products don't go to that extent anymore, although I've seen some that you think, really? But it's very easy to kind of go too far and try and go for that big sell and try and get in as many people. But then if it's not doing what you say it does, or there's a downside that's going to turn people off, they're going to find out at some point. You may as well, I don't want to say weed them out because that sounds horrendous, but you may as well tell them early on and save everyone a whole bunch of time.
No, it's the right way. Yeah, it's to weed out the people that are not your ideal client.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got business cards with a shot from Liverpool Football Club from Anfield on the back, and a couple of people have told me you shouldn't have that on your business cards because some people are going to be put off by that. And like, well, so what? If they are, then probably not.
Probably not the right person.
Not the right person for me. No,
absolutely. Yeah. I when I'm posting on LinkedIn, I don't do it loads, but I will talk about my political beliefs. And it's the same thing. Like, I probably put some people off wanting to work with me because my beliefs don't align with them. But then they're probably not the right match for me anyway. They'd be better off with someone else that's more aligned with them. So I think
it'll be harder work for you to work with somebody that you don't get along with, you don't agree with. Yeah.
Which isn't to say that I can't get on with people who are politically different to me. I very much do. But if someone's that far away from you, it's what else? Calls to action are a good one. So don't be afraid to have plenty of calls to action like littered through your copy. You don't need to just like have one at the bottom. And people will, especially if you've got like a long landing page, like a sales letter type thing.
Yeah.
People will skim through it. They'll sort of skip through and they'll see headings. They're like, that's another good one actually. Use good headings because people will skip through and they'll spot heading and they'll read that section. So don't be afraid to have calls to action, but stick to one, generally speaking.
Confused mind doesn't buy.
Exactly. Yeah. You'll see phone number, email, click here to too much. One call to action. Make it easy for people to choose what to do. Like, pick the one that you want them to do. And don't be scared as well to put like pre-qualify people in your call to action. So if your minimum order is 8,000 bolts, put that in there. Tell people that, or say what would you be on your minimum order. And another thing actually is, like, this is getting away from copy a little bit, but if somebody comes to you and says, I only want 3,000 bolts, I'll say, well, our mates down the road, they're brilliant, they'll do you some bolts. Because they'll remember that, and then when they need 8,000 bolts, they'll probably come back to you. So calls to action are really good, and be specific in your calls to action as well. Don't have, if you ever type the words "click here," just slap yourself on the wrist. It's horrible. Because again, we know I just mentioned how people scan through stuff, they skip through, And sometimes they'll have seen that, they'll come through the link and they'll probably already know roughly what you do, and they'll just skip to the bottom to the call to action. So if the call to action is then saying, click here, it's like, well, what? Why should I? If it says
Do you
click
know,
here,
I don't know if it still does. I've not checked it for a while, but because everybody used the word click here on their website for such a long time for something specific, if you were to Google click here, the number one result for click here was the website that had the most links going to it using the term click here, which was, can you guess what that was?
No, but I'm curious.
Oh, it'll be obvious when I tell you. It was adobe.com, and it was the Acrobat download reader.
Of course it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense, yeah.
You can't have a PDF without having the Acrobat reader first, and you need to get that. Click here to download that. So Google click here, that page was number one in Google for click here. It may still be, I haven't checked it. But
it may also, I'm going to check that after we finish. But you'd never ever use the words click here.
Click here.
In terms of, when you're writing to convert, it's you want to tell people exactly what's going to happen when they click there. So even just saying sign up is better than, or whatever is better than saying just click here. But I tend to, I like quite long calls to action. I'd say something like sign up to our weekly newsletter to get valuable insights to your inbox every Tuesday lunchtime. Even if the person has skipped the whole page, they can just read the call to action and know what they're going to get it. It kind of sums it up at the end. It's very much worth doing. I've lost track of what else I've said. Generally, being concise is a really good one. Don't waffle.
I like that. I've lost track of what I said.
I've lost track because I've talked so much, and now I'm telling you to be concise. Yeah, but talking's different to writing, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. It's yeah. There was one thing you mentioned a few moments ago about being specific with numbers, for example. If it's saved £2,000 off this, then tell them that. If it's saved, helped 365 businesses, say that. Quite often when businesses create content where they're not specific, where it says this has helped lots of businesses or this has saved loads of money, it's because they've used AI.
That's probably very true, yeah.
And AI is not specific because it generalizes, and you can tell it's AI. I have to ask this is your industry. What are your thoughts on using AI in any type of content?
Oh, there's a question. I'm probably going to make some enemies, however I answer this one.
Sorry about that.
To be honest, I am not exactly a fence sitter, but I have concerns about the ethics of, well, it's not technically AI, it's large language models, and that's a different thing. But I have concern about the ethics of them and how they're trained and how they're used, and also about the environmental impact of them, like the amount of water and power they use per query. It's enormous,
isn't it?
And that, it's somebody, I can't remember who it was who posted about it on LinkedIn a while ago, and I kind of did some reading around it, and it's quite frightening. Like if you look at the amount that the big tech companies' use of like power and water cooling, etc., has increased since they started using large language models. It's like, oh, that's not good. So I do definitely have concerns there, and I'm very much against the kind of fully AI generated copy and content, which is very much, it is ChatGPT. Like you can tell when something's been lazily generated with AI. There are AI tools, like specific copywriting tools, which supposedly write you brilliant copy and content. I've never tried one, so I can't comment personally on those. I would be very surprised if they could produce the same results as a human, not even necessarily a copywriter, but a human, because when you write, if you do it well, you don't have to be an expert copywriter to do this, although we're pretty good at it. That's one of the reasons we're good at our job, is you can create a kind of emotional engagement with the person who's reading, and you cannot get that from an AI generated piece of text because it doesn't have emotions. It doesn't have any of that. On the flip side, as a research and planning tool, it's quite useful. You just need to be very, very mindful that you can't trust anything that it says. But I don't necessarily see that as being a problem in itself, because I use Wikipedia as a research tool, but
Yeah.
I can't necessarily trust everything that Wikipedia says. Like, there's very few genuinely trusted sources that you can look at that and say that is absolutely categorically correct,
Mm.
because it's the internet.
That's very true. I mean, you can't trust news outlets. You can't trust governments. You can't trust politicians. You can't trust ITV or BBC News. Sometimes when it tells you something, you have to take everything at face value or distrust it.
Yeah, and I think
AI exactly
with
the same.
yeah, absolutely, and with your news outlets and your websites and whatever, a lot of the time, it's not intentional misleading necessarily. It's just that everything has to be so fast
Mm.
that they don't have the time or the manpower or the person power to do the level of fact checking that they would have done 10, 15, 20 years ago. So yeah, yeah, absolutely, you have to fact check anything that you get from AI, but you do with anything else as well. So yeah, I'd say I use it, but not exhaustively and not loads. I think another thing that concerns me about AI and the kind of the wider adoption of it is that we lose our creativity and our
Mm.
ability to research. And if you know, it is quite nice for doing the boring jobs, but the boring jobs are quite important for learning.
Yeah.
You know, if you get an AI to do all the boring jobs, then what's going to happen to the sort of kid out of college who would have been doing those boring jobs and learning how to do them and then work their way up? You're kind of taking out that step
Mm.
on the ladder. And this isn't just in copywriting. This is in pretty much anything that AI can do, which is almost anything at a computer at this point. That scares me a little bit as well.
Yeah. It's the same with art. When I was at art school, I was trying to do fantasy art first, and they said, no, scale it back. You need to be doing still life first. You need to be doing human form first, because until you know how the muscular form takes shape when you're drawing it, when you're sketching it, you can't then do anything fantasy, because you're not aware of how you're manipulating something if you don't know how it's put together in the first place. It's the same with content. If you're not doing the boring stepping stone work, you can't jump to the exciting bit without knowing how it's supposed to be formed in the first place.
Yeah, you need that background to be able to do it. I mean, AI is an art is just no. I can see the use in sort of the kind of things we're talking about, copying content, but
Yeah.
I can't imagine ever wanting to spend my free time like looking at AI generated artwork or reading AI books or listening to AI music. It's that
Yeah,
emotional connection that it does not have. It's not there
because it has no soul.
because it has no soul. It's
Yeah.
not, of course it doesn't.
Yeah.
It's not a person.
It's like I've seen this said before, that I wanted artificial intelligence. I wanted robots to do the cleaning and the washing, so that I
Yeah.
could spend time reading, writing, and doing art.
Yeah, I wanted to load the dishwasher and
not the other way around.
yeah, I don't want to be the meat slave while it does all the fun jobs.
Exactly, which is ridiculous. So, in terms of your advice, then, if business owners are listening to this, as I'm sure they are and they have done, and they're thinking, I can just go to ChatGPT and I can say, right, write me a landing page for my accountancy website on VAT returns, 500 words, and they'll be able to do it literally within 5 seconds. What would you say to them?
Don't do it. Simple as that. I mean, if you can't afford a copywriter, and that's fair enough, because you know it's not cheap to hire someone who's genuinely good at their job. Spend a little bit of time learning how to write, and it doesn't. You don't have to be a perfect writer or author, but learn a little bit about just basic stuff like sentence structure, how to form structure, how to use like verbs and adverbs, and how to build something that's reasonable. It doesn't have to be the greatest, because actually there is loads of AI copy and it's all very similar, and it's all very it's like you said, it's soulless. So actually, if you can write something that is honestly you, talking about your product or your thing, and you've sort of listened to some of the stuff I've spoken about, and you've made it easy to read. You've avoided using too much waffle. You've talked about your user, even if it's got mistakes in it, even if it's not perfect, it's going to stand out from the AI stuff because of that, because it's you, because it's real. And I would wager my last pound coin, which probably is my last pound coin actually, because I don't really have cash anymore, that people are going to engage with that, and it's going to make them take notice more than the 450-second AI landing page, which just has exactly the same tone of voice and is going to elevate your thing and supercharge that, and in exactly the same way. It's going to stand out just by dint of being human.
Because at the end of the day, people buy from people.
Yeah, this is it. Like this, a lot of the copy that we write is designed to get someone to make a call, to talk to the salespeople. So the job of that copy is to be almost like a salesperson that's on all the time. And AI is not a person; it's a sales bot, and nobody likes talking to those chatbots.
I spoke to one just the other day, and I asked it several questions, and I got the exact same response to 3 of them, and it infuriated the hell out of me. Because it picked up a keyword I'd put in the question, and it just went, you mean this? Completely oblivious to the fact it had given me that response already, and that was not what I wanted.
Yeah.
It just pisses off the customer, really pisses them off.
It does, yeah. And people know. I think probably the thing you should do is ask yourself, do I want to read another piece of AI copy that reads like all the other pieces of AI copy? And the answer is probably no. So why would your customer think any differently? Because you're a customer just for something else.
Yeah. Well, that applies to everything you could do in digital marketing on your own website, isn't it? You know, there's loads of things that people tell you can do, or tricks that have worked over the years that really you shouldn't be doing, and every agency knows you shouldn't be doing, but a lot of them do anyway.
Yeah.
You think, would I want to see that myself if I was looking for something? No, I bloody would not. Then why are you doing it to inflict it on someone else? It's not going to help your business. It's not going to help your client. Just don't do it.
Yeah. As a caveat to that, I would say, if you're in that position and you're a small business owner, like you're a small marketing, you are a marketing team, don't be afraid to use ChatGPT. It can be really good for whichever one, Gemini, Copilot, whatever. You can ask it to give you a structure for a landing page, or give you 10 structures for landing pages, and then use that to build your writing from, and put your words into it. You can use it to rewrite your sentences. So if you've got a sentence and you know it's too long and you want to shorten it and make it into a few sentences, ask ChatGPT to rewrite it in 10 different ways, 20 different ways. And chances are, because I do this sometimes, because your brain tends to mush at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I find. And you're trying to get an article or a page finished. I need to reword this, and I just can't do it. I'll ask ChatGPT to reword it 20 different ways. Won't use any of them, but it'll be okay if I just and move that. Like, got it, nailed it. That's for stuff like that. Yeah, I do find it useful, but not the whole. Just chuck it at ChatGPT.
Yeah. I like how you say your brain starts to mush at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And for those people listening to this, it is just about to turn 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
I'm just going to melt in a minute.
Just going to disappear into the background. Yeah. So that's AI. So it's a useful tool to use as an aid, as possibly for research, as possibly for helping with structures, maybe for helping with sentences, but for Christ's sakes, do not use it as a substitute for writing your own content.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you can learn to do everything yourself first. And then when you ask a ChatGPT to do it for you, you'll know what it's done wrong.
Yeah. No, that's a good point as well. I have to mention, obviously, the first time I saw you was at a SEO Brighton talk, where you were delivering a talk from the stage spectacularly, referencing the whole thing and weaving The Princess Bride all the way through it. It was fantastic. I thought, I love that. I love that movie. It's one of my favourite films.
Same.
How did you find the experience of doing a talk at SEO Brighton? Because instead of doing it, obviously, for for clients or for potential clients or for businesses. You're doing it for real nerds and techies in the crowd, some of whom may have lots more experience than you or have been doing this for a lot more than you. How was that as an experience doing that, wondering, ooh, I could get picked up on something here if I'm not careful?
Do you know what? I absolutely loved it.
Did you?
Yeah, I really enjoy it. What was interesting was kind of figuring out where to pitch the talk. So kind of what level I should be pitching at, because obviously it's Brighton SEO. So there's a lot of more kind of techie stuff going on there. Like most of the talks are more technical, like the stuff that I don't really understand. But then there is like a big copy and content element to it. So there are going to be. I've been there as a punter, and I'm not like an SEO expert. I am very much a writer. So do I want to pitch it quite high, or do I want to sort of keep it quite low? I kind of, in the end, I decided to sort of keep it quite not basic, but not too in depth either. Because it's a 20-minute talk. There's only so much depth you can go into. And I figured probably at least some of the audience are going to be either fairly early in their career as writers, or they're going to be all-round SEO people who maybe know more about the tech side but need to write for their jobs. It's quite a wide-ranging skills level, I guess.
Yeah.
So yeah, I kind of just and I thought I don't a lot of it's stuff that's not necessarily wrong or right, but I figured if anybody is like an absolute expert, firstly they can always get on and go to the bar if they want to, but also I find it really useful to hear it might be something that I do already, but maybe to hear it framed in a slightly different way, to think, oh yeah, okay, that's why I do it, but yeah, that makes sense that way as well, and to give a kind of slightly different perspective on why we choose to do things a certain way. And I thought probably nobody's framed it around The Princess Bride before.
I don't think they have. No.
I've never seen.
Shockingly, you'd think it would have been done every year, but no.
Well, why on earth not, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I started my career of doing talks around unexpected things. It was at the start about March last year, I think.
Oh wow.
43 Clicks North, where I work, we do a quarterly sort of marketing meet in Hull. For anybody, it's completely free. Anybody can come along, and be 2 or 3 speakers at each of those. And I spoke at one of those, and I did a similar thing, except I based it on the Gruffalo, so the children's book, which my daughter had been absolutely adoring at that point. She would have just turned 5, and she loved it. And I love the Gruffalo as well. So I thought, well, let's do something a little bit different. And that went down really well. That one was pitched again slightly differently because it was a different audience. It was a general marketing audience rather than SEO. So when it came to Brighton SEO, I thought, well, what could I pitch? What could I do? I didn't want to do the same thing again because, that's cheating really, isn't it? So I thought, The Princess Bride's a brilliant film, isn't it? I think we just rewatched it, and my wife loves, she will, whenever it's mentioned, she will say, yeah, it's our film we watch when we're tired, because I can fall asleep in the middle of The Princess Bride and I will wake up quoting along with the movie. That's how much I love it. And I thought it's maybe not as well known as it should be. It's got kind of a cult following almost, but I feel like it's dropped off the radar a little bit. And the more you know about The Princess Bride, it's a wonderful, wonderful film. The book is absolutely fantastic. And if you ever read anything by the cast and the crew about their experience of making it, they had such a wonderful time making it, that the whole thing, the whole movie, everything about it is just filled with so much joy. And I thought, if I can get people to, if it helps them with their copywriting brilliantly, if it makes one person watch The Princess Bride who hasn't seen it before and get some of that joy, I've done my job. I'm happy with that.
Yeah. I've seen how Inigo Montoya's famous line from the film is used as the boilerplate for networking. So, hello, polite greeting. My name is Inigo Montoya. State your name. You kill my father. Prepare to die. State your intent. It's beautiful.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
But it's just this. Oh yeah, I could talk about The Princess Bride literally all day. It's wonderful. Anyone who's listening, if you haven't seen The Princess Bride, forget everything else I've said. Just go watch it.
Just go watch that now. That's it. That's the takeaway from this podcast.
That's the one takeaway from this.
Go and watch The Princess Bride right now. That's what that's your homework. Go and do it. You'll thank us later. Because do you know, I watched it quite late in life. I was probably about 24, 25 before I watched it. And one of my best mates had watched it for years and said it was fantastic, and I never watched it, and he was right. Yeah, it is fantastic. I mean, we could talk about The Princess Bride all day, but we are pretty much out of time now, Will, unfortunately, so we have to cut it short. So as a final point, if anyone is listening to what you're saying, thinking, I would love to learn more about Will, I would love to learn more about the company he works with, how I can become a client of yours, what's the best way for people to reach out to you?
Best way to find me is on LinkedIn. I'm Clean Slate Will, or if you just Google, search Will Slater on LinkedIn, you should find me all right. The company I work for is 43 Clicks North. We are a performance agency based up in Hull. Also on LinkedIn, 43clicksnorth.co.uk, or just Google it or find me and ask me.
Thank you very much, Will. I shall put those links as well below the podcast in the description. So anyone listening to that wants to reach out to Will, you'll find those below. Just scroll down and click on one of those and get in touch with Will. Thank you for being on the podcast. I've loved it, and I loved your talk at Brighton SEO. It was absolutely fantastic, mate.
Thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.